There was a time when Gregory believed in fairy tales. Not the kind with dragons and magic wands, but the kind where hard work pays off, where loyalty is rewarded, and where love, real love, lasts forever. For 12 years, that belief had served him well. His accounting firm had just made him partner. His colonial-style home in the suburbs had the white picket fence he'd always imagined. And Jillian, his high school sweetheart turned wife, still looked at him the same way she did on graduation day. Or so he thought. They met in calculus class, junior year. Gregory, the quiet kid with perfect homework, and Jillian, the vibrant girl who somehow made numbers dance. "You're my better half," she'd say on their anniversary each year, clinking champagne glasses across candlelit dinner tables. "My rock." He'd believed her every time. They built their life meticulously, weekend by weekend, dream by dream. Dinner parties with friends where they'd finish each other's sentences. Sunday mornings with coffee and crosswords, her feet in his lap. Their photo albums told the story of two lives perfectly intertwined, no visible spaces between them. The invitation to their 15-year high school reunion arrived on a Tuesday. Gregory remembered how Jillian's eyes lit up, how she immediately called to RSVP for both of them. "It'll be just like old times," she'd said, squeezing his hand. He didn't notice the slight tremor in her fingers, or how she checked her phone more frequently in the weeks that followed. The gymnasium was transformed with streamers and balloons in their school colors when they arrived. Former classmates greeted them, some with hugs, others with awkward glances that Gregory couldn't quite interpret. He noticed Troy Davidson by the punch bowl, former quarterback, now a real estate developer according to his name tag. Gregory waved politely. Troy didn't wave back. "I need to tell you something," Jillian whispered during the alumni slideshow, pulling him into the hallway where their lockers once stood. There was something in her voice he'd never heard before, a certainty, an ending. The words came in fragments that Gregory's mind refused to assemble. "Not happy. Found what I've been missing. Troy and I. These past 6 months." When they returned to the gymnasium, her hand was no longer in his. She walked directly to Troy, who wrapped his arm around her waist with practiced familiarity. The room fell silent as former classmates watched the scene unfold, all of them knowing what Gregory was just discovering. "I'm leaving with Troy tonight," she announced, not just to Gregory, but to everyone. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but everyone else already knew." In that moment, standing alone in a crowd of witnesses to his humiliation, Gregory realized that the perfect life he'd built was nothing but a house of cards, and everyone had been waiting for it to fall. The drive home from the reunion unfolded in complete silence. Gregory's white knuckles gripped the steering wheel so tight his fingers went numb, but he barely noticed. The numbness was spreading everywhere anyway. When they reached the house, their house, Jillian collected a pre-packed suitcase from the hall closet. She'd planned this down to the minute. "I'll come for the rest tomorrow while you're at work," she said, not meeting his eyes. That night, Gregory sat alone in their bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of their shared life. Rage surged through him in waves so powerful his body physically shook. Then came the grief, hollowing him out until he could barely breathe. By morning, something else had taken hold, a cold, clear instinct for self-preservation. "This ends on my terms," he whispered to the empty room, and reached for his phone. By noon, the locksmith had finished. By 2, he'd spoken with his lawyer. By 5, their joint accounts were frozen, and Gregory had drafted emails to their friends explaining the situation with dignified brevity. He wouldn't leave them wondering, as he had been left to wonder. He wouldn't leave room for gossip. "It's not about revenge," he explained to Colleen, his assistant, when she found him still at his desk well past closing. "It's about protecting what I've built." Colleen nodded, setting down a cup of coffee and sitting across from him. "We've got your back, Greg. Everyone here does." It was true. In the following days, as legal papers were filed and property negotiations began, Gregory's colleagues formed a protective barrier around him. James from the tax division offered his vacation home for weekends when staying in the house felt too painful. Colleen fielded calls from Jillian, blocking her attempts to blindside Gregory. Their support revealed a truth that his marriage had obscured. He was valued for himself, not just as half of a whole. Divorce proceedings dragged through spring and into summer. Each meeting exposed another layer of Jillian's betrayal, secret accounts, plans made months in advance, lies told to mutual friends. Each revelation should have destroyed him, but instead, something unexpected was happening. Gregory was becoming stronger. "You know what's strange?" he confided to James one evening over drinks. "I keep waiting to feel like a failure, like I wasn't enough. But I'm starting to see that this was never about my worth." "That's because it wasn't," James replied firmly. "Some people will betray you no matter what you give them." Gregory nodded, turning his wedding ring on the bar counter one last time before slipping it into his pocket. The weight of it had been growing lighter day by day, replaced by something more valuable, the knowledge that he could be broken and still refuse to be broken down. That betrayal could wound him but not define him. By the time the papers were signed, Gregory no longer recognized the man who had stood alone in that gymnasium. That man had believed his worth was tied to someone else's loyalty. This man, scarred but healing, grieving but growing, knew better. He was building a life that couldn't collapse with someone else's departure. A life that was entirely his own. Rebecca entered Gregory's life like an unexpected ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds. He first noticed her in the finance department, her desk positioned beneath the harsh fluorescent lights that somehow made her glow rather than wash out. She'd recently been hired as an analyst, and Gregory had been assigned to mentor her through the company's labyrinthine accounting systems. "You look like someone who understands loss," she said one afternoon, sliding into the chair across from him during lunch. No preamble, no small talk. The directness of it knocked the rehearsed pleasantries from his mind. "What makes you say that?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Your eyes," Rebecca replied. "They're alert but guarded, like someone who's watching for the next blow." She smiled then, a gentle curve of her lips that carried no pity. Mine probably looked the same. Over the following weeks, their conversations deepened. Rebecca had emerged from her own relationship wasteland just months before, a fiancé who'd been leading a double life with a colleague. The parallels to Jillian's betrayal were uncanny, but where Gregory had responded with calculated self-preservation, Rebecca had chosen bold reinvention. "You're allowed to be angry," she told him one evening as they worked late. "All that dignified restraint is admirable, but sometimes you need to feel the fire to move through it." Before he could formulate a response, she leaned across his desk, pressed her lips briefly against his, then pulled back and lightly slapped his cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so outrageously inappropriate and perfectly timed, that Gregory burst into genuine laughter for the first time in months. "What was that?" he managed, his hand touching the place where her palm had landed. "That," she said with a grin, "was a system reboot." Something broke open in Gregory that night. Not the walls he'd built, but the ice forming around his heart. Their relationship evolved with a deliberate slowness that felt like luxury after the frenzied aftermath of his divorce. Rebecca never rushed him, never demanded certainties. Instead, she offered understanding that could only come from walking a similar path. "We're not defined by what they did to us," she whispered against his shoulder 6 months later as they watched sunrise from her apartment balcony. "We're defined by what we build from the ruins." When Gregory proposed a year after they began dating, there was no grand gesture, no audience. Just two people who had learned that love isn't a protection against pain, but rather a courage to risk pain for something genuine. Their wedding was small, but vibrant with authenticity. Looking at Rebecca across their living room as friends toasted their union, Gregory realized he'd found not just a partner, but a witness to his resurrection. Someone who understood that their love wasn't a neat conclusion to trauma, but rather a testament to the human capacity for renewal. The months following their wedding unfolded like chapters in a book neither Gregory nor Rebecca could have authored in their previous lives. Their shared wounds had become a foundation for something beautiful, a relationship built on hard-won wisdom rather than naive hope. They settled into a rhythm, Gregory's methodical nature complementing Rebecca's intuitive approach. At work, they maintained professional boundaries, but colleagues noticed the subtle transformation in Gregory, the way his shoulders had relaxed, how genuine smiles now reached his eyes. "I think we should volunteer for the Thompson audit," Rebecca suggested one evening as they reviewed quarterly reports in their home office. "Something doesn't add up in their financial statements." Gregory nodded, trusting her instincts. "I'll put us on the team tomorrow." Neither could have predicted how this decision would circle back to their past. 3 weeks into the forensic audit, Rebecca froze while reviewing transfer records. "Gregory," she called, her voice unnaturally tight. "You need to see this." The trail was unmistakable. Troy Daniels, the man Jillian had destroyed their marriage for, her supposed true love, had been systematically embezzling funds from his department. The money trail led to a mortgage payment in Nevada, childcare expenses, even a second vehicle registered under his name. "He has another family," Gregory whispered, the irony washing over him. "Your fiancé had a colleague, my wife had Troy, and Troy had a wife and 2 children in Henderson," Rebecca finished, pointing to the documentation. "And from these dates, they've been together for 9 years." That night, they sat in silence on their deck, the weight of this revelation settling between them. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "We need to tell her." Jillian. Gregory's first instinct was to protect himself from being drawn back into his ex-wife's drama. "Yes," Rebecca said firmly. "Not for revenge. For closure, hers and yours." The meeting took place at a neutral cafe. Jillian arrived looking polished as always, but Gregory could see the brittleness behind her composure, the same fragility he'd once worn. "What's this about?" she asked, eyes darting between them suspiciously. They laid out the evidence methodically, professionally. With each document, each photograph of Troy's other home, his other life, Jillian's facade cracked further until she sat before them utterly exposed. "He said I was his salvation," she whispered, her voice hollowed out. "He said we were destined." Rebecca reached across the table, briefly touching Jillian's hand. "Men like Troy and my ex, they're architects of beautiful lies. You and I just happen to be the perfect audience." Gregory watched his wife console his ex-wife, feeling something unexpected release within him. Not satisfaction at Jillian's pain, but the final untethering of his own past resentment. "What happens now?" Jillian asked, looking directly at Gregory for the first time. "With Troy? With the company?" "That's not your burden," he replied with a gentleness that surprised him. "Your only job now is to rebuild, just like we did." As they left Jillian sitting alone with her shattered illusions, Rebecca squeezed Gregory's hand. "Some truths hurt before they heal," she murmured. Gregory nodded, knowing they had given Jillian something he'd once desperately needed. Not revenge, but the brutal mercy of reality. The years unfurled like a tapestry after that fateful meeting with Jillian. Gregory and Rebecca's love story deepened with each passing season, their shared wounds transformed into wisdom that carried them through life's inevitable challenges. Their wedding was intimate, just close friends and family beneath a canopy of oak trees. Rebecca wore forget-me-nots in her hair, and Gregory found himself unable to speak through his vows, his voice thick with emotion as he promised her forever. "I never thought I'd find this again," he whispered as they danced their first dance. "Something real." For children followed, 2 boys with Rebecca's analytical mind and 2 girls with Gregory's quiet determination. Their home became a sanctuary of genuine laughter and honest conversations. At work, they rose through the ranks together, eventually founding their own consulting firm built on principles of integrity neither would compromise. Decades passed in the sweet mundanity of a life well lived. School events, family vacations, quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and crosswords. They watched their children grow, graduate, fall in love, start families of their own. Through it all, Gregory and Rebecca remained each other's true north, their love deepening with a steadiness that defied the frantic pace of the world around them. When Rebecca was diagnosed with cancer at 62, Gregory became her unwavering advocate. For 18 months, he memorized medication schedules and research papers, held her hand through treatments, and read poetry to her when pain kept her awake. "Don't you dare make me your whole world," she told him one evening, her once vibrant hair now reduced to silver wisps. "Promise me you'll keep living." "You are not my whole world," he answered, kissing her palm. "You're the lens through which I see it clearly." She passed on a Tuesday morning in spring, the cherry blossoms visible from her hospice window. Gregory felt her absence like a physical wound but honored her wishes, continuing to engage with life even as he carried her memory with him everywhere. 3 years later, at their oldest granddaughter's college graduation, he spotted Jillian across the ceremony lawn. She'd aged gracefully, the brittleness he remembered replaced with something softer, more authentic. "My nephew is graduating," she explained when they found themselves in the same reception line. "Computer science." They spoke briefly of their lives, her career change to education, his grandchildren. There was no romantic spark, only the gentle acknowledgement between 2 people who had once caused each other pain but now stood on the shores of separate, peaceful lives. "Rebecca was extraordinary," Jillian said before they parted. "You both deserve the happiness you found." Gregory lived another decade, surrounded by family who carried pieces of Rebecca in their mannerisms and values. When his time came, it was peaceful, simply closing his eyes for a final rest. And somewhere beyond understanding, in a realm where love transcends even death's boundaries, Gregory opened his eyes to find Rebecca waiting, forget-me-nots in her hair, her hand extended toward his. "There you are," she said, her smile as radiant as the day they'd married. "I've been waiting." He took her hand, and they stepped forward together into forever.